but it is 1:05 right now, so I do want to get started. Let me start off by introducing myself. I'm Shannon Turner. I'm a software developer with ActionKit, so you may see me on the other end of support tickets. If you ever file a request for support, you need help, you're reporting a bug, you uh, really just have a question with how do I do this in ActionKit? Developers like me are on the other end of those support tickets. And so in addition to helping out folks, I also get to build a lot of the features that you work with and use every day. So if there are things that, really just don't make sense to you or things that you would like to see, please let us know. We really do base our work based on what is going to be actually useful to you. What do you want to see? What is going to be most valuable and useful to our clients? So let us know the good and the bad in the support. And anyways, thank you so much for being here. Let's get started because we have a lot of ground to cover. So first up is an outline of what we're going to be covering today. We're going to start off with a brief overview of fundraising with suggested asks. Then we're going to cover some intermediate level snippets and logic that you can use to customize your mailing content. After that, we'll look at custom mailing fields to extend the functionality of your mailings. Once we've done that, we're going to move on to merge files and queries, which give you more options for customizing your mailing content. After that, we're going to look at some of the most common ways that you can accidentally slow down your mailing builds and how to avoid doing that. Then we'll go into A/B testing your mailings. I also want to cover some really clever ways that you can target your mailings using custom user fields. Then we'll cover how to customize your pre-flight mailing dashboard and how to send your mailings to people at a specific time in their time zone. And we've got a couple of questions in the chat. Will the slide deck or recording be available afterwards? And yes, absolutely it will be. Once this is all done, I'm going to upload this to YouTube, send you out all the links to it once it's finished processing. And I'm also going to send you these slides because throughout the presentation, you're going to see a lot of links that you'll want to click on. And I want you to have those links as well. So after we've talked about how you can customize your targeting with custom user fields, we're going to look at how to customize your pre-flight mailing dashboard and to send mailings to people at a specific time in their time zone. So first up is fundraising with suggested asks. Now, this is something I really want to emphasize. So I'm going to pause for a minute to say, I know a lot of clients are fundraising on ActBlue, but sending your fundraising emails in ActionKit. We think that's great. You can still use these tricks that I'm going to show you now to send suggested asks in your mailings. So regardless of whether you're using ActionKit donation pages or ActBlue, this is applicable. First thing that you're going to have to do, though, is create a donation page in ActionKit. And if you're linking to an ActBlue donation page in your mailing, you still do need to set this up in order to use suggested ask snippets. But you can just think of this page as like a dummy donation page. So on the screen here, you can see that I have the donation options where you can configure some important details about how we ask for money. And this is the part that we're really concerned with here right now is the suggested ask formula. You can choose whether to use a suggested ask formula by choosing one from the drop-down menu. And we give you a couple of defaults, but there's also a plus sign where you can add your own. So if we were to click that, then we would see a pop-up window that prompts for a few things to get started. So you can enter a name for your suggested ask rule, select the currency that you want to fundraise with, and we also have some other options that I'm going to show you in greater detail. Next, we have to decide what donation amount is going to um, count towards the calculations that we do. So we have a few options here. Should we look at that person's highest donation when we are deciding how much money to ask for? Maybe their second highest donation, maybe that's a better gauge. Maybe you want to look at their average donation amount because maybe that tells you more. Maybe they gave you a really big one-time donation, but most of their donations are actually smaller. Or you could look at the most recent contribution that excludes any recurring donations. So you have a lot of options here. Should we look at a person's donations from the beginning of time to figure out how much to ask them for just in the last 12 months? Again, you have a lot of options. There's also an option to exclude tags, which excludes donations made on any pages with those tags when it's looking at your highest donation and the time span as well. Then if we scroll down a bit more, here are the rules that determine how much money to ask for based on someone's previous donation amounts. So if I were to choose the highest donation and in the last 12 months, then this asks, was Shannon's highest donation in the last 12 months less than $0? Or in other words, has she not given anything? If so, let's ask her for $25. If that's not the case, was her donation less than $9? If so, we're going to ask her for 10. If that's not the case, was her highest donation less than 14? If so, we're going to ask her for 15. And you get the idea. Once you've saved your suggested ask rule with all of the conditions that you want, then you can use it on your page. This last slide here was for the default suggested ask conditions, and it's really aimed at one-time donations. But this is the default suggested asks for recurring donations. And the ask amounts this time, you can see, are way smaller than before, right? If the highest donation is less than $99, we're only going to ask for 10. But the principles of this work the same. We just need to think about it differently. You would use something like this if your goal is to nudge donors toward a recurring donation. So you start out by asking them for $25 if they've never given before, and that's on a recurring basis. Then if the highest donation that they've ever given was like $99 or less, that's like a one-time, oh, I gave $90. Then you're going to ask them for 10 on a recurring basis. So like $10 a month, roughly equal to about $100. Okay. So you get the sense. You can obviously adjust these numbers as you see fit and, change the ask amounts however you like. But I wanted to point out why these ones look so different from these. So we just went through how to set up a suggested ask on a donation page, and now we need to connect it to our mailing. So to do this, we need to set the mailing's landing page, which a mailing's landing page is the call to action. If this were a petition mailing, the call to action would be sign this petition on the petition page. But of course, this is a fundraising email. We're going to send a donation page as the landing page. So again, whether you fundraise entirely in ActBlue or entirely in ActionKit or a mix of the two, use a donation page as your landing page, and this lets you use a suggested ask in your mailing. And here I've written out my email body. I've got a little personalization up top, but here's the actual interesting part. Can you chip in, suggested ask, and here's where you can find it in the snippets. So to use this suggested ask, you have to have a donation page as a landing page, and it gives you that nice little reminder right there. So next up is intermediate snippets and logic. Let's jump right in. So first off, again, a reminder in case folks joined late, you're going to be getting these slides later so that you have these links. You're also going to be getting a recording of this later as well. And I want you to have these links because I think the documentation is really well written. It's super thorough, and I think it's really helpful. The first link here is to the snippets overview, which shows all of the types of snippets that are available for you to use in your mailings. Second is our documentation on our custom tags and filters that we added into ActionKit. These allow you to do things like multiply two numbers together and show that result as a snippet. But really, the real magic comes in how these individual building blocks, almost like Legos, get combined together in your mailings. So there's more than one way to put together a suggested ask. Using some of the snippets from the documentation, I can do things like create this quick and easy suggested ask without needing a donation page. And at this point, you might be really annoyed with me and say, Shannon, why would you go through the trouble of showing me that, I need to create a donation page and set up that suggested ask? Why not just show me this way? And the reason for that, please don't be mad at me. I wanted to show you some of the different ways that you can accomplish the same goal. A lot of times, especially in a tool that's as flexible as ActionKit is, there's lots of different ways to approach the same goal, and they all have different trade-offs and drawbacks and different ways of doing things. Besides, we have a lot of clients who are using this method and a lot of clients who are using the donation page with the suggested ask tool. Both of them are fine. And since both of them are supported, I wanted to highlight them both. That disclaimer out of the way, let's jump into it. Here I have 3 snippets on this slide. The first one is requires value, donations.highest previous. And this means a few things. First, that if someone does not have a previous donation, they cannot receive this email. It also means that in order to preview this mailing, you need to save your targeting or specify a user that has a donation. The second snippet here shows the user's highest previous donation. And I put a $sign in front to make it more legible and not just look like a number. In this third snippet, I'm using a filter described in the documentation called multiply. It's going to multiply my number on the left, which is my donations dot highest previous. That's my user's highest previous donation, with the number on the right, which I've chosen here as 1.5. And here you can see that I've added those snippets into my email body. Sorry about that. My dog was asking to be let out of the room. I guess she got tired of the presentation. So here's my donation history for the user that I'm going to preview this mailing with. I've got one donation for $8.98. And when I preview this mailing for that user, you can see here that I'm previewing it for that user. This is what I see. And I think this is a great example of a quick and easy suggested ask. By changing the multiple, right? Like before we had multiple of 1.5, by changing that multiple, we can also add several tiers of asks really easily. So one very important caveat though is that this method requires that your users have made a donation already. So if you're only targeting this to existing donors, that's fine. But if you wanted to turn non-donors into donors, then you would need to use the suggested ask formula that we saw in that very first section. But because there's always lots of ways to approach every problem, I'll show you how you can get around that limitation in just a few slides. So let's add a third snippet in here, which is identical to the second, but this time with the multiple changed. So instead of the highest previous contribution times 1.5, we're going to do times 1.75. And when we preview, we notice a problem right away. We're asking for $15.71.5. That looks weird. No one's going to be able to give that amount of money. And if we were to preview other people, we'd actually also see this problem come up sometimes in this second snippet as well, depending on what amount they've given. But luckily, another filter on these snippets can help us clean that up. So take a look closely between the differences between this slide and this one. So right here on this third snippet, I've added the float format filter. And that says format this number as a decimal. And this number 2 tells it to round to 2 decimal points. So now when we preview, we can see that we're asking for $15.72, which is much better. Hopefully this gives you a sense of how you can combine snippets together with filters, including multiple filters on a single snippet, like multiply, float format. So you can do this with lots of different kinds of filters and snippets. Now, a few slides ago, I mentioned that one of the drawbacks of this approach was that because we were using the requires value donations.highestprevious snippet, we wouldn't be able to send to anyone who hasn't already donated. But actually, we can repurpose this mailing to be able to send to non-donors as well. And my first step is to delete this requires value donations.highestprevious. So if we remove that, then we can start adding some more snippets to be able to say, well, if they're not a donor, then do this. But if they are a donor, let's show this. So I've got a few lines here highlighted in red, and let's step through them one by one. But I want to point out that the lines that are not highlighted in red, the ones right here in the middle, these ones are the ones that we had before. These are exactly the same as previously. So the title of this slide is Conditional Text, which is really just a fancy way of saying, show me specific text when we've met these specific conditions. And my first line here, highlighted in red, is a snippet that says, if donations.highestprevious. And that means if I have a previous donation. So if I have a previous donation, let me show this content that I had before, right? Asking for, can you give this amount of money that you gave before, or maybe a little bit more? And then this next line that's highlighted in red says else. That snippet says, if it's not the case, then let's show something else. So if the person who's opening this, receiving this, has a previous donation, let's show them this content. If they're not, otherwise or else, let's say, will you become a first-time donor and give $25? And my final line here says end if, which is how we end this conditional text. And here are the previews for those conditions. The first one here in the background is for an existing donor. No surprises here. The second one in the foreground, highlighted in red, is for a non-donor. So you can see it's asking, will you become a first-time donor? Now, I'll show you in a minute how you can use the with tag, but for now I want to explain what it is, why it's important, why we should use it. So most commonly, you'll use the with tag as a shortcut to help save yourself a bit of time in typing when you have a snippet that you're using over and over and over again. Like in this previous example, when we're using donations.highestprevious over and over and over again, like we're using it 4 different times here. Easy to make a typo, easy to make a mistake. And actually, it's really important to use this tag when you have a snippet like donations highest previous, to turn that into a with variable, because actually behind the scenes, donations.highest previous is doing a database calculation behind the scenes. It's not even just looking up information in the database, it's looking it up and then performing calculations. And that's not obvious on your end. There really wouldn't be any way for you to know that. But so that's why I'm telling you. But one thing I've seen is a lot of people notice that, hey, my mailing's sending speed for this mailing is kind of slow, and what gives, what's the reason for that? And so, you send that in as a support ticket, and we look at it, and it turns out one of the culprits was that the mailing was using this donations.highest previous a ton of times for every single email that went out. And you can avoid this problem by using the with tag, and I'll show you how to do that in the next slide. So this is how you actually use it. The syntax is with, and then here's the thing that you want to store into a variable. So donations.highest previous, and then the word as, and then the name of your variable. So in this case, I'm storing donations.highest previous. So I don't need to say donations.highest previous every single time. Instead, I can just say HPC, which is the name of my new variable. So after I've done this with, then I can use it as a snippet, as you can see in the second line. So instead of donations.highest previous, multiply, float format, I use HPC, multiply, float format. And finally, this end with is required. It says, okay, we're done with this variable. We don't need it anymore. And I'm going to include that at the very end. But again, I wanted to emphasize that if you have a variable that you're using over and over and over again, this with construction can really help you. Saves you some typing. I think one of the biggest benefits is it makes it more readable. So here you can see I've converted our previous example to reuse the donations.highest previous as a variable called HPC. So I want to stress that this works identically to what we did previously, but I think this is a lot more readable than before. And if it's more readable, I think you're less likely to make mistakes. And of course, the other benefit is that because we're only calculating this donations.highest previous one time, then your mailings are going to send much faster. Maybe it's not that big of a deal to do this kind of database lookup and calculation if you have a small number of people that you're sending to. But if you were to send this to a few million people, then you might notice that, oh, this is a little bit slower than some of my other mailings. I also want to show you how you can round to the nearest dollar. So this is a cool trick that you can use your filters on your snippets to do. Previously, we've used the float format to say, format this number, round it to the nearest 2 decimal places, which is handy so that you're not asking for fractions of a penny. Here, I can use float format 0 to say, I want to round this number to 0 decimal places, which rounds it to the nearest dollar. And so you can also do some fancy tricks to round to the nearest $5 or nearest $10, which I'll show you in a minute. So here in this first example, I'm not using a multiple of the highest previous contribution, but rather this is just the highest previous contribution, and we're going to round it to the nearest 5. And if you look closely, we're actually doing some math tricks to get there. And I'm not going to go into the math tricks, but essentially these cancel each other out. But it's going to round to the nearest $5 or the nearest $10 when you make your ask. You can also do this with the suggested ask variable. It doesn't just have to be done with your donations.highestprevious. You can do all of these tricks with the suggested ask variable as well. So here you can see I'm doing the highest previous contribution times 2.5 and then rounding to the nearest 5 and the nearest 10. And again, because I'm not a sadist, I'm not going to try to make you like scribble down what all of these things are. Remember, you're going to be getting the slides and the recording once it's all done. So this preview shows that if we have a highest previous contribution of $27, these snippets really do work. Switching gears a little bit, oftentimes you'll want to include a date in your mailing. And by default, most snippets that use dates will give you those dates in year, month, day format. I personally like that format a lot because it's clear and unambiguous, but I admit it's maybe not the most natural looking. I don't think a lot of people talk like this. Luckily though, we can change this format using the date filter to use whatever format you like. And here I've linked to all of the available format options that you can use with date. And I'll show you an example of what I mean. So here you can see that we're using the donations.mostrecentdate, which is a slightly different snippet to show the date of this user's most recent contribution. So thank you for your recent donation on 2019-03-07. And so I guess, you can see what I mean about the date looking kind of out of place the way it's formatted. Looks a little weird. People don't really talk like that, even though it would be very unambiguous. So normally you'd use the date filter to convert the date. And sometimes that's going to work and sometimes that's not going to work. And the reason for that is the date filter only works on a date. And you might be saying, come on, Shannon, how is donations.mostrecentdate? How is that not a date? It sure looks like a date, you're right. But behind the scenes, it's actually just text. So when we try to use the date filter, it doesn't work and you get a blank where the date should be. Maybe you've seen this, maybe you've written into support about it, and I'll show you how to get around that. By the way, in case you're wondering, Shannon, what the heck is the capital F, lowercase j, comma y? What is that? And actually, it's all detailed out in the available format options for the date filter. So each of these letters has a specific meaning. So it's when you go through, you'll see what options you have available. But to actually fix your problem, the thing that you actually care about, to make this work, we need to convert the text that looks like a date into an actual date using the load date time filter. Then we have an actual date that we can use the date filter on, and then we end up with thank you for your recent donation on March 7th, 2019. So this might be confusing and tricky and annoying. It is, it's not just you, but it comes up often enough that I wanted to show you how to get around this weird problem. And maybe if you're paying close attention, you've noticed that the letter codes for load date time are different than those for date. And I've included a link here that has all of the options for load date time as well. Take a deep breath because we are moving on to custom mailing fields. There we go. So during our client conference in 2019, I ran a training on how to create mailing wrappers. And mailing wrappers, of course, control the appearance and layout of your mailing, and they also allow you to add some extra functionality. One common way to add functionality to your mailings is by using custom mailing fields, which is also covered in this training video in great detail. So as an example, this would allow you to do things like swap out your organization's logo and disclaimer based on whether it was the 501c3 or 501c4 or the PAC entity that's sending the mailing. This is especially interesting for nonprofit groups. Another example would be to add tracking codes to your links. We're not going to cover that today because the video goes into how to do that in depth, but I wanted to give you the link to the video so you can check it out. What I would like to do today, though, is supplement what the video covers specifically around custom mailing fields. Custom mailing fields allow you to change something about your mailing on a one-off basis. But I want to step back real quick and really to understand custom mailing fields better, it would be really helpful to take a look at custom user fields and custom page fields first. So here are some examples of some custom user fields that you might have. So information that you can store about your users. And most of you probably collect and store a user's employer and occupation, especially if you're fundraising using ActBlue. Some other user fields that you might use are, did this person donate in 2020? How much did they give that year? Are they a registered voter? I especially like, did this person donate in 2020 as a custom user field? Because although you could figure that out by running a report, that report's going to take a bit of time to run. It's not going to take too long for a single person, but if you're looking at a full year's worth of donation history for every single person on your list, and you're trying to target a mailing based on that, that's going to take a much, much longer time than if you ran that report ahead of time and stored that information into a custom user field and then used that custom user field for targeting. And I'm going to show you how to do that later on. Another nice benefit of this sort of thing is you'd be able to see at a glance a summary of how much money that they gave that year. The donation summary page for a user tells you someone's all-time giving record, but if you're interested in year-to-year summaries, a custom user field can be really helpful here. Now let's take a look at some examples of custom page fields. These allow you to change the functionality of a page on a one-off basis. So for example, the built-in featured image custom page field allows you to customize what the featured campaign image that gets displayed is. Custom CSS and custom JavaScript are two custom page fields I've written about on our blog. And if you create them, they'll give you the ability to customize the styling and functionality of your pages on a one-off basis by adding in CSS or JavaScript code onto your pages. This can let you do things like make one-off changes to your pages without needing to create a new template set for the occasion. And the reCAPTCHA enabled custom page field allows you to choose whether the reCAPTCHA spam protection is active on a given page. The most important thing to remember, though, throughout all of these examples is that custom page fields allow you to change the functionality of a page on a one-off basis. You don't need to create a new template set every single time you want to add some customization. You can use your custom page field and just enable the feature on the pages that you like. Custom mailing fields follow the same principle. You don't need to make a whole new email wrapper. You can customize something about your mailing on a one-off basis by changing the custom mailing fields. And it only applies to that specific mailing. There are some of the built-in custom mailing fields here on the slide that you can take advantage of. And these are specifically mentioned in the template with sidebar email wrapper. The way that the template is built, if you have any text in the sidebar text custom mailing field, then it's going to create a sidebar with your desired text. If you don't have anything in that field, then you don't get a sidebar. Same idea goes for signature and references. So here's some more ideas that you could implement for custom mailing fields, which are drawn from what clients like you are actually using them for right now. Many clients like to use UTM tracking links in your emails, and you could specify all of the details about that using custom mailing fields. This link goes to a blog post I wrote on the subject so that you can implement this as well. Along similar lines is specifying a source or an ActBlue ref code using custom mailing fields. And the ref code, I want to say, is probably one of our most common custom mailing fields across all clients. In the template with sidebar wrapper, the button text always reads "Take action" and the color is always red, but you could edit the wrapper to use a custom mailing field to customize the text and color. And we've seen lots of clients do these types of customizations as well. Other clients like to use custom mailing fields to store additional information about a mailing, like an internal tracking code. So this doesn't actually go into the content of the mailing itself, but instead it's used for internal reporting. So think of something that's similar to notes or tags, but maybe not quite fitting neatly into either of those categories. Next up, we are going to look at how we can include data from a spreadsheet or from one of your ActionKit reports in a mailing. So you're already comfortable with sending emails and using snippets to personalize your content, but sometimes wouldn't it be nice to pull data from a spreadsheet and include it in your mailings? So in 2017, when I was on the client side before I joined the ActionKit team, so for instance, we did a big major push telling senators don't repeal Obamacare. Part of the campaign was saying, hey, if you do this, you're going to be taking away the insurance from this many people who had gained insurance through Medicaid expansion. That was made possible by using merge files. And I'll take you through how you can set that up. So let's update this example a little bit. And here I have a sample spreadsheet that shows me how many people don't have health insurance in each state. And I'm going to download this spreadsheet as a comma separated values or CSV file so I can upload it into ActionKit. Next, on the Mailings tab under Data, I'm going to find the Merge Files section. Let's click that now. And then I can upload my CSV file that I just downloaded. And I want to call attention to the help text, which reads, upload a comma or tab delimited file to merge into your mailing, matching targeted users on that first field. So what this means is that we're going to determine who meets these criteria based on that first leftmost column. So in this case, that's the state abbreviation. Once you've uploaded, the file will start processing. Small files go very quickly, but if your spreadsheet is especially large, it might take a minute. Here it says save to view when we're looking at the number of rows and the number of lines in the file. So I'm going to click save now. And now I can see that there are 53 rows in total, which makes sense if I think about it. I've got my one header row, I've got 50 states, I've got DC and Puerto Rico. So that's 53, lines up with my expectations. And if I scroll down a bit more, I can see a handful of sample rows, which are randomly selected to give me some more peace of mind that the file loaded correctly as expected. Now that we've loaded our merge file and everything looks good, let's add it to our mailing. On the compose screen of your mailing, you'll want to click on the merge file in the basics section under merge data, and then choose your merge file. And you can add a merge file from the compose screen as well by clicking the plus sign, but I like to do the merge file song and dance before creating my mailing, because I think it's a little bit easier to confirm that everything worked well, but that's just my preference. Now that I've loaded my merge file and attached it to the mailing, I can use the snippets from the snippets menu. And sorry, there we go. The snippet's name will be merge, and then a dot, and then the name of the column from your spreadsheet. So this reads, there are merged uninsured people living in merge.state name who don't have insurance. And if you look closely, you may have noticed that I'm also using the Commafy filter to add a comma in the thousands place on the uninsured number so that all those zeros don't bleed together. So finally, we can take a look at my preview, see what that looks like. And we've got 24,200 people in the District of Columbia who don't have health insurance. So this was, when I was on the client side, this was a really effective appeal. It's personalized, it's specific, and it's actionable for the senators. So we found this to be a really persuasive tool. We'd also love to see what you do with this, and this is just generally, anytime you're doing something really cool with ActionKit, please let us know. We would love to hear about it. So submit a support ticket, say, hey, check this out. You can brag, it's okay. You have my permission. So now before we move on to merge queries, I wanna think about some more examples of some merge files that you could create and use. So maybe you want to push some US House members to vote a certain way. So you could compile a list of US House members and a short message like, thank you for supporting DC statehood, or please support DC statehood. The 700,000 residents of DC deserve a vote in Congress. Maybe you wanted to do some get out the vote to retake a state legislature. And you could include the margin of victory of the state Senate seat that was won or lost by however many votes. Maybe you want to reference how many people live in a specific city and how many of those people would benefit from the policy that you're proposing. Merge queries are just like merge files, but instead of using data from a spreadsheet, you can use any data that you can write an ActionKit report for. So just like with merge files, you need to match to your users. In our merge file example, we matched to users based on which state they live in. And merge files and merge queries have the same requirements on how to match to users. So you can do user ID, you can do email, you could do state, you could do zip code, and so on. Merge queries behave just like any other report in ActionKit, but they have 3 specific criteria. Like I mentioned, that first column must match to users on user ID or email or state or zip code or district or so on. They also must use the report category merge, which tells ActionKit, hey, this is a merge query. I'm going to use it in my mailing. And you also have to name all of your columns because you're going to use these columns in your mailing as snippets. So let's go through how we'd create a merge query. First, on the Reports tab, you can see that I've created a report called Subscribers by State. And my description is, because I added a description, is how many subscribers we have in each state. For the query type, I'm using users. You can use a few other query types when you're making merge queries, but this is maybe one of the more common ones. So I know I'm a broken record about this, but one of the most important rules about merge queries is that your first column has to match to the users. So again, if we think about our merge file example, that used state. If you live in Maryland, show me how many people are uninsured in Maryland. The exact same rules apply here. And in this case, we're also matching on state. And maybe what I want to do is say, hey, thank you so much for being a part of this movement. You are one of this many people living in this state who are working to get healthcare for everyone. And again, here I've linked to all of the user columns that you can match on. Like I mentioned before, we also need to tell ActionKit that this is a merge query. So we're going to use the report category merge. And here, you'll also get to choose whether you're going to cache the report results or refresh them every time. And if you're using this query in a recurring mailing, you'll see this nice warning right here. If you're using this query as a recurring mailing, you'll want to leave it set to every time. Likewise, if the report has information that changes frequently, then you probably want to leave it refreshing every time. But if it doesn't change all that often, or maybe it's okay if it's like very slightly out of date, you can have this report cache its results, which means to store them, save them and store them and get to reuse them again, saving those results for an hour or a day or a week. And this can be especially useful if the report takes a long time to run or if you use it really frequently. Actually, adding the merge query to your mailing follows the same process as we did with the merge file. So on the compose screen of your mailing, under merge data, under basics, you're going to add a merge query. Then you're going to search for your merge query in the drop-down menu. And if you don't see your merge query, that's for one of two reasons. Either your merge query doesn't have this merge category yet, and you need to add that to your report and then save it. Or maybe you had your compose screen open and then you created your report and you need to refresh your compose screen. So if you don't see your merge query in there, just refresh, it should be there. So like before with merge files, let's look at how we'd include a merge query in our mailing content. So here our snippet is query.column name. And like before, you can find this in the snippets menu with all of your snippet columns available. Now, when we're looking at our preview, we might notice something a little unusual here. And this comes up pretty frequently in support questions, so I wanted to mention it here today. In the places where my merge query snippets are, sometimes you might see, instead of the data I expect, I'm seeing the column names of my merge query. What's going on is behind the scenes, if we don't have your targeting set built, we're going to show you a simulated preview specifically for merge queries. And the reason we do that is because sometimes, depending on your merge query, it can take a very long time to run, and it would be mean to make you wait just to see a preview. So the help text here is informative. To view the layout with accurate data, send a proof. But if you do have your targeting built, then you might see that your previews come through as expected when you have a merge query. But since this does come up often enough, just be aware that there is a reason we do this, and just be aware of it, but get a proof and you'll be all good. On the subject of targeting though, I wanted to mention two special targeting criteria that you'll see on the targeting screen if you're using merge files or merge queries. These options allow you to say, everyone who would be matched by my merge file, that's my targeting. Everyone who gets matched by my merge query, that's my targeting. You can combine that with your normal targeting options to limit this even further. But generally, if you're using a merge query or merge file, you almost always want this checkbox checked, because the whole point of merge queries and files is to display additional content for those users matched by your merge query or merge file. Last thing before we move on, I wanted to give you one idea of what merge queries can do. Here is, we've got the user ID, that's going to be what matches to my users. And then unlike in the previous examples, which matched all users in a specific state, the user ID here will only correspond to a single user. The other column gives you the total amount of donations that someone has made in a calendar year 2020. And here you can see that I'm filtering to only show me this for people who actually gave in 2020. Deep breath, and then we're going to move on to faster targeting builds. Many clients write into support asking why their mailing targeting is taking so long to build. And I'd like to look at some ways that we can speed it up. This is our general advice that we might give you if you wanted to know how to make your mailing targeting build faster. We're going to take a closer look at what each of these mean. If you're happy with how fast your mailing targeting is built, then that's great. But for everyone else, these tips can help you save some time. Before I get started though, I do want to mention that these guidelines might not be right for you. They're general advice and your specific situation might have some nuance that's not covered here. But first, let's move into list hygiene. List hygiene is important for you to do for your deliverability. If you're only mailing to people who still want to hear from you, then your open click and action rates are going to be a lot higher and you're going to get the best inbox placement. These same good list hygiene practices can also help you target your mailings faster because if you have fewer people in your targeting sets, then that's just going to go quicker. So this links to our re-engagement documentation, but essentially the process is you define who's considered active on your list. So for instance, anyone who has opened or clicked or taken action from a mailing in the last 180 days. Anyone who doesn't meet that criteria is added to the re-engagement list, which you can then target with a, hey, are you still here kind of message and try to get them to reactivate. But bottom line, if you aren't doing some kind of list hygiene practice, you definitely have a lot of dead weight on your list. And beyond lowering your overall open click and action rates, this is also going to have an impact on your deliverability, whether you get put into the promotions tab or the spam box, and how quickly your mailing targeting can compute. Next up is targeting carefully, and this is all about using targeting that doesn't duplicate effort. This is especially important when using multiple queries from the query library since each one needs to be run separately. One example from when I was a client was we were using the re-engagement list to segment out all of our inactive users, and we weren't mailing to them. But then we excluded them all over again by creating another query that excluded them. Again, even though they were already excluded. That was mostly harmless because it didn't change our targeting, but it did mean that our mailing targeting builds took a lot longer than they needed to. Once we dropped that redundant query, our targeting builds were much, much faster. So your mailings will rebuild their targeting anytime you do any of these things on the slide. When you click rebuild, when you change your targeting criteria, when you change the targeting criteria of a mailing that other mailings depend on, or when you check rebuild at send. And I'm not telling you don't ever do these because all of these are things that you might want to do sometimes. You know, they're all good things to do from time to time, but rather to think carefully about when you need to do them and not to do them in a way that's going to harm your other mailings. So a lot of times when clients write in about a mailing that's taking a long time to rebuild, behind the scenes, what's happened is that they've made targeting changes that they didn't realize would impact other mailings and cause those processes to start all over again. I know this is a bit abstract, so let's take a look at exactly what I mean. Not every client uses auto excludes, but for the ones who do, this can be a common mistake to make. So the auto excludes feature lets you exclude mailings that all go on the same day so that you're not sending people multiple emails in the same day. This help text here highlighted in red, I think is really informative and useful. It reads, typically, full list mailings go at top, more targeted mailings further down, and random sample tests at the very bottom. And you can see that's also how I've ordered my mailings here. My full list send that would go to 1.2 million on top, my fundraiser kicker in the middle, and my random sample test at the bottom. The way auto excludes works is that the targeting of each mailing depends on the mailings below it. So my full list send depends on the targeting of my fundraiser kicker and my random sample test. My fundraiser kicker depends on the random sample test. And what this means is that if you change the targeting of this random sample test, everything above it needs to be rebuilt. So in this screenshot, you can see the timing of when my mailings were last rebuilt. Here I have my 10,000 recipient random sample test. Here I have my full list. Now, if I rebuild my random sample test or if I change its targeting, either of those things mean that a new set of 10,000 people need to be chosen. And if that happens, then if I look at my fundraiser mailing on the proof and send screen, I'm going to see that my targeting query for my fundraiser just got, it's gone. And the reason for that is because it depended on the targeting for that random sample test. Since that changed, this one has to as well. Similarly, my full list sending also needs to be rebuilt, and again, for the same reason. And I want to show this image again just to point out the order of operations here. So we've already rebuilt our random sample test, which invalidated these two, and I need to rebuild these two. So now, a mistake that I could make is if I rebuild my full list and then I rebuild my fundraiser, well, I'm going to be kicking myself because rebuilding the fundraiser is going to invalidate everything above it, which means I'll need to rebuild my full list again. And I know that this is confusing and tricky, but hopefully these examples help to make sense of it. And I think one of the other problems is that because the full list send is going to take the longest to calculate its targeting set because it has the most people in it, this can be one of the things that causes just lots of problems and headaches. So being aware of this order of operations can really help a lot. Switching gears a little bit, the last thing I want to mention on faster builds is caching your queries. So by default, your reports are going to run every time when you're using them to target your mailing. And if you use a lot of query reports in your mailing, caching them can be one of the best ways to speed up your targeting builds. Because by default, when you include a report in your targeting, we run that report, we get the results, and then that is one part of your targeting. What caching does is we still need to run the report, but once we've run it, we're going to save those results for later. And you can choose whether we save the results for an hour or a day or a week. And then the next time you use that report when you're targeting your mailing, we'll check to see, do we already have those results saved? If you do, then we'll use those saved results rather than running the report again. This can be a huge time saver, especially if your report takes a long time or if you're using it frequently in your targeting. And here you can see how to set up one of your queries to cache its results on the edit report screen. When your category of your report is mailer or merge, you can choose how often it refreshes its results. Refresh every time means every time your mailing is rebuilt, we need to run this report as part of building that mailing's targeting set. Refreshing hourly or daily or weekly means that every time your mailing is built, we will check to see if we have a fresh report run. If we do, we're going to use that report result. If it's stale and out of date, then we need to run the report first. And behind the scenes, we actually do a lot to refresh these reports for you automatically if you've used them recently so that your mailings will build more quickly. Deep breath, and we're moving on to A/B testing. Now, you're already familiar with how subject line testing works, but this is a little bit different. A/B test groups for mailings allow you to test different content. Let's take a look at what I mean. Here I have a draft about the Green New Deal that's pretty pessimistic. Without the Green New Deal, it's over. And here you can see that my content reflects that as well. I also have an optimistic draft. With the Green New Deal, our future is bright. Here's the targeting screen of my pessimistic draft. I've included my main email list, and I'm limiting the targeting to 10,000 people. At the bottom of the targeting screen, maybe you skip past this checkbox without giving it much thought, but if you check the box, you can begin the process to group 2 or more drafts together into an A/B test group. So I'm going to check the box and click New Test Group to create a new group, but you could also use an existing one if you had it. Here, I've given my test group a name, which is the Green New Deal Optimistic/Pessimistic Framing Test. I've added my 2 drafts in, and I'll click Save. Next, you can see that the test group has been chosen, and then I can click Save, or I can click Next, Proof and Send to save and continue. You might also notice that there's a warning above your limit. This isn't anything to be concerned about, but just something to be aware of. Since my draft is limited to 10,000 recipients, this limit applies to each draft. So since my test group has 2 drafts, that's a total of up to 20,000 recipients for these mailings. On the Proof and Send screen, you're going to notice a link to the test group where you can view all of the drafts. And importantly, test groups all share identical targeting and they all get launched together at the same time. This test group screen will show you each draft, which includes the mailing ID, the subjects, the from lines, and a preview of each mailing. Scrolling down a bit, you can also see our optimistic draft in here as well. Scrolling all the way down below your previews, you can see the part where you can request targeting counts and eventually send or schedule your mailings. So here you can see that I need to request a targeting count before I click send. And if I clicked that, then it's going to begin targeting and eventually it'll finish. Now I can refresh the page. And you'll notice that the previews now tell me how many people each draft this is expected to send to. So this one goes to 10,000 people, no surprises here. Finally, at the very bottom of the screen is our familiar send or schedule for later, which will launch all of these mailings in this group all together. As promised from earlier, now I'm going to show you how you can use custom user fields to target your mailings. If you're fundraising with ActBlue, chances are you already have data on a person's employer or occupation in ActionKit, but maybe you have other information about this person in another system that you'd like to store in ActionKit. And a custom user field would be a very good place to put that. Or maybe you have data in an ActionKit report, and this is interesting and valuable data, but it takes such a long time to run, so it's not as actionable as we'd like it to be. We're going to cover how we can run such a report and then download the data and put it into a custom user field. First, let's create a custom user field. On the Users tab at the bottom of the sidebar is Custom User Fields. And if we click that, you can see here how to create a custom user field. It doesn't have to be any more complicated than this. It's a name, it's a display name, it's a brief description, and what type of field is it. One thing I do want to mention though is that unlike most other things, you cannot change the name of a custom field once you've created it. So choose carefully. Please also make a note of this custom user field's name, Donations Made 2020, because we're going to need it in a few slides. This example is about how we can get data from an ActionKit report and then store it into a custom user field. So let's create a report. Here, my report's name is Total Donations in Calendar Year 2020. And I've given it a nice description that references that I'm going to put this in the custom user field, Donations Made 2020. This is also the user's query type. Here are my display columns. First, we have the user ID so that I can use this as an import later, but you could also use email address or AKID as an identifier instead of user ID if you wanted. The next display column is the sum of payments in calendar year 2020. You might also notice that I've used US Eastern as the time zone cutoff, and I've formatted this as a number without the currency sign. Importantly, and highlighted in red here, I've named this column User Donations Made 2020. That's so ActionKit knows that we want to save this column into the custom user field, Donations Made 2020. Finally, our filter criteria says, you know, Shannon, if someone didn't make any donations in 2020, let's not include them in this report. Once we save and our report runs, you can see the results. We have two columns, and one is for user ID and the other is for the donations that they made in 2020. Since we're going to import these results back into ActionKit, let's download it as a comma-separated values file, or CSV. And here we're in the home stretch now. It's time to create an import page. You can see that I've got my title, my short name, my notes field. All of these are good and important. And I'm saying, don't change the subscriptions. So if someone's subscribed, leave them subscribed. If they're unsubscribed, leave them unsubscribed. There is a lot going on in this spreadsheet. Normally, I don't like to have such a messy spreadsheet, but I just want you to focus in on this highlighted part here that says skip action creation. Most imports will create an action. They'll create users, and they'll modify other fields that you include in your import CSV file. This checkbox, though, is for you when you only want to import these custom user fields. And this does a lot of things behind the scenes to make these types of imports much faster than they would otherwise. So bottom line, if you're only importing custom user fields, like we are in this example, go ahead and check this box. But don't take my word for it that all of this works. Let's actually take a look. On the Users tab, we can find one of the users that we just ran the import for. This is one of them. And if you were to look back and see the user ID from the previous slides, you'll know that that matches. And on the overview screen, if we scroll all the way down, then we'll get to our custom user fields. And here we can see that here's the description of that custom user field, and here's how much this user gave in 2020. But let's go to their donation summary screen to see if that's correct, because it's always helpful to do a gut check of your data. Here on the donation history page, if we take a close look at the dates, we can see that there were donations totaling $11 and refunds totaling $3.02. which brings us to $7.98. Now that we feel confident in the data, let's look at how we can target it in a mailing. Here on the targeting screen, at the very bottom of the targeting criteria drop-down menu is custom user fields. Let's select that. Once we've done that, we can search for the custom user field that we want. I'll type donation to autocomplete the one that I want, and then I select donations made in 2020. For this particular example, let's leave values blank. This means target anybody who has any value at all in this field. If this were a different example, you could also target by a specific value by entering it here. But for this particular example, it doesn't make sense, so let's leave it blank. Now we're ready to save our targeting. And that's how you do it. Now that you've seen the whole process, here are some more things that you could do, some other ideas. And I want to emphasize that this process really works best for reports that take a long time to run, so maybe you can't use it in targeting and mailing very easily, but the data doesn't change frequently, so you could import it and then do that. So maybe the number of donations a person made in a year, right? You can have the amount, you can have the number. Those are good ones that you could do. And also, the numbers aren't going to change. It's in the past. You could also do what was their open click or action rate over time. That could be interesting to look at as well. And one last thing before we move on, I do want to give a brief warning. When I was putting together the slides for this presentation, I was originally going to tell you, hey, here's how you can make this report reusable by specifying the year. But then I realized that you can't do that because you can't specify the year in the column name for your data. Normally, I wouldn't mention something like this. I'd just, not include it in the presentation. But I know that my first instinct was, let's make this report reusable. So I can use it for 2019 and 2018 and so on. Maybe it's your first thought too, especially if you make a lot of your reports reusable. Normally, that's a sharp instinct. But in this specific case, you have to be careful because look here, we've got highlighted in red 2019. These are the years that I'm doing, but my column name still reads 2020. So if we aren't careful, we could end up importing incorrect data. And of course, because there are 1,000 ways to do everything, there are still ways around this problem. But I'm not going to tell you how to do them. It would take a long time. And I'm going to caution you here to be careful with your column names when you're importing custom user fields. And to say that this is maybe one of the few cases where you wouldn't want to reuse reports. Make a copy and then change everything to 2019. So if you've seen me present before, you know that I'm a broken record about the pre-flight dashboard ever since I was using them as a client. So thank you again for indulging me once more. Checklists help pilots and surgeons remember every step that they need to take in stressful situations, and they can help you too. ActionKit's pre-flight dashboard is perfect for this because it appears just before the send button on the proof and send screen. And you can customize it to include checklists, campaigner resources, and a wide range of automated checks. Let's take a look. This is a screenshot from my ClientCon 2017 presentation of the pre-flight dashboard that we used when I was a client. And yes, the magenta that hurts your eyes was intentional. You can see some automated checks here. These show whether our pages and mailings were tagged consistently. And they have these big, bright, painful warnings that hurt your eyes when there's something to be fixed. Maybe I am a sadist after all. But best of all, this dashboard appears right above the send button. So this information is right where you need it the most. So I'm going to give a few examples of some of the automated checks that I did when I was building out this dashboard. and things that you could do too. So does my mailing have a tag for each of my important tag types? And this links to a blog post that I did about how you can use a tagging system that uses tags that have different types. Like these sorts of tags are for the topics, and we have tags for who's going to receive this mailing, and so on. Do the tags for my mailing and its landing page, do they match or do they conflict? And I can have an automated check for that. Does my mailing have a value in the notes field? If not, hey, I want to describe this mailing. Please put something in the notes field. Are all of my links secure? Are they using HTTPS? Am I using alt text for accessibility on all of my images? Because that can be a good thing to do. Am I making a
We can't hear you.
You can't hear me anymore?
Oh, now you're back.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. Leaving off with, am I making a common targeting mistake? This can be the sort of thing that's a very client-specific thing. Maybe you never make targeting mistakes. Maybe they're caught much earlier in the process. But for us, when I was on the client side, we actually had some common mistakes that we made over and over again. And this type of dashboard really helped us to not make those mistakes. Not every one of your checks has to be a pass or fail kind of thing either. Sometimes they can be more informational, like, are we using an A/B test on this mailing's landing page? Then again, if you are using an A/B test on the landing page, you probably also want a pass-fail check for, did you actually start the A/B test? And another check could be, does our landing page have the expected values for custom page fields? Or does it have anything in these specific custom page fields at all? But the bottom line, the thing I want to emphasize here is if it's in your database, you can add an automated check for it in your pre-flight dashboard. Here's another example, this time from my blog post on setting up a pre-flight dash. This might seem silly or pointless, but checklists really are quite helpful. I know I get nervous every time I click send, and these sorts of checklists really can help you avoid mistakes, especially in high stress or quick turnaround moments. You can also see here that I've added one of those automated checks that I was telling you about. The notes field was left blank on this mailing. This example here comes courtesy of one.org, so I wanted to say thank you to one.org for allowing us to show this. You can see that they have a checklist here. Looks pretty good. And there's also this, I just love this part. We have a link to their campaign email guide. This sort of thing is so valuable, especially to new staff members who are onboarding and maybe not sure about the processes. So this sort of thing can be so valuable. Down below, you can also see that they have a series of automated checks down below, which are checking for things like whether the mailing has all of the different tag types that they use. We are almost out of time, so rather than going into detail about how to set this up, I'll leave you with this blog post. But the main thing to keep in mind is that when you're putting together this dashboard, dashboards use HTML plus the results of your reports to display those automated checks, like in the examples that we saw. So you create a report that checks, does this mailing have a blank notes field? And if it does, we display the warning. And if it doesn't, we don't display anything. When you're creating your pre-flight dashboard, I really recommend starting out small with one check at a time and slowly build up over time until eventually you have a very large number of checks that you're doing. All right, this last section, maybe you're already familiar with it, maybe you already do this all the time. but this is a much loved feature that maybe you're already using called timed sends. Timed sends allow you to schedule a mailing to be delivered at a specific time in the recipient's time zone. So if I think 10 o'clock in the morning is the best time for people to open up their email and to start reading my emails, I want to send it so that no matter where they live, at 10 in the morning, they're going to get this email. To get started, let's click Schedule for Later to see our options. Next, I'm going to check the box to mail each user at the selected time in that recipient's time zone. So 10 o'clock in user's local time. Depending on how far in advance you've scheduled this mailing, it's also possible that the local time that you've chosen might have already passed for some users. And in that case, you can choose whether to mail them immediately or to mail them at 9 a.m. the following day, their time. When you click schedule, you'll be taken to a confirmation screen where you can see a breakdown of the delivery times and the time zones involved. So you can see how many people living in each time zone and what that local delivery time is. And you might notice that some of these time zones do have, they are the same, right? Like US Eastern is the same as American New York. And we have some people who are in these buckets, but it's the same local delivery time. Once you've scheduled your mailing, you'll also find it listed under Scheduled in the Mailings tab. And it's going to remain here until every message has been delivered. After that point, you'll find it under Sent, just like all of your other mailings. Whew, I am taking a deep breath now because we covered 133 slides in that time. So thank you so much. Here are some links to our documentation, to some tutorials that we have, a bunch of step-by-step guides. I'm going to send you the recording as well as a copy of these slides. I hope you find these resources valuable. And I'd also like to ask you, how did I do? I would love to know your feedback for this training, whether you'd like to see more trainings like this. So please, I'm going to give you this link.